Picture this. The dollar collapses. American sanctions become useless. Wall Street panics. And a group of countries that were once called developing now call the economic shots. Science fiction? Maybe not.
Well, now not only are the BRICS countries merging their economies, they're talking about a unified currency, like the euro. Well, if they have a unified currency, American sanctions are going to be worthless.
We're looking at BRICS. No, not the building material, but possibly the new building blocks of the global economy. What started as 5 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has expanded to include nations like Iran, Egypt, and the UAE, and 40 more are knocking on the door.
These 9 countries now represent a bigger slice of global wealth than the G7, the main economic group of the United States and its junior partners. Population-wise, BRICS represents about 5 times more people around the world than these G7 nations.
But is this just a fancy diplomatic club for countries with a grudge against Washington? Or are we witnessing the beginning of a major power shift? Let's find out if the dollar's days are numbered, or if BRICS is just building castles in the sand. BRICS isn't a military alliance like NATO. It's not an economic union like the EU. It's something different.
BRICS is largely a counter-hegemonic grouping. Its members are much more articulate about what they stand against and what they oppose than necessarily what they are in favor of. But it's largely an expression of frustration and grievance over the fact that the current international order to its members seems to be made by the West for the West.
The original alliance was formed back in 2009, but it remained mostly a talking shop until recently. What changed? Well, Western sanctions on Russia after its invasion of Ukraine lit a fire under the group. When your country gets cut off from SWIFT, the global banking messaging system, and your central bank's assets get frozen, you start looking for alternatives fast. And many other countries watch nervously thinking, that could happen to us next. These countries aren't necessarily buddies though. They have their own conflicts and competing interests. India and China have literal border disputes. Brazil and South Africa are democracies, while others, not so much. So what actually unites them?
What unites them is an anti-Western posture. As has been said, they disagree on many other things, and the proposal about the currency, that we're going to trade in rubles, in rupees, etc., in order to bypass the dollar, this is nonsense.
But is it really nonsense? Let's take a closer look. The global economic system we've lived with since World War II was designed by the victors, mainly the United States. The dollar became king not by accident, but because America emerged from the war with its manufacturing intact while everyone else was rebuilding. This system has given America what French politicians once called an exorbitant privilege. The US can print dollars, and other countries accept those dollars in exchange for actual goods and services.
A foreign country sends the United States the fruits of its labor: wine from France, electrical equipment from Japan, copper from Africa, whatever. And we send them little green pieces of paper, the dollar, the $10 bill, the $100 bill, which costs absolutely nothing to produce. It's a cheap piece of paper. They accept the paper and we get the produce. Wow.
This arrangement lets America run trade deficits indefinitely, sanction countries it doesn't like, and generally write the economic rules of the game. But for the BRICS countries, especially the major players, this system feels increasingly unfair.
In my judgment, and even though Patrick is right about a number of his criticisms, this is a historic turning point. I cannot overstress it. Here we have, for the first time in a century, a serious economic competitor to the United States and its role in the world. We've never seen this before in the lifetimes you, me, and the people watching this program.
These countries together represent over 45% of the world's population and more than a quarter of global GDP. And unlike previous challenger blocs, they actually have the economic heft to back up their ambitions. More importantly, they're growing faster than the traditional Western powers. China's growth rate is projected at 4.8% this year, India at a whopping 7%, while the US lags behind at 2.8%. You don't need to be a math genius to see where this is heading if those trends continue. In 2023, BRICS underwent its biggest expansion yet, and the list of new members might raise some eyebrows.
The BRICS coalition, which was founded by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, officially added 13 new nations to the alliance's partner countries, including Bolivia, Cuba, Nigeria, and Turkey.
Turkey, a NATO member, wanting to join BRICS. That's like being a vegetarian while working part-time at a steakhouse. But it shows how these countries are hedging their bets in an uncertain world.
You know, it has U.S. military relationships. It obviously doesn't want to throw in its lot entirely with an anti-Western coalition.
And there are more potential members lining up.
The appetite amongst African nations to potentially join BRICS is squarely on the table. President Cyril Ramaphosa hinting at that and the expansion of the membership of this BRICS bloc.
This expansion creates both opportunities and challenges for the alliance. More members means more economic weight and diplomatic influence, but it also means more competing interests and potential internal conflicts. Here's the elephant in the room. When we talk about BRICS, we're really talking about China and some supporting actors. The economic disparity within the alliance is enormous.
The United States GDP this last year about 25 trillion. So you understand, Russia is 2 trillion, the United States 25 trillion. No contest. No one should ever imagine that either the Soviet Union in the past or Russia now is some kind of economic competitor of the United States. Never was, isn't now.
But China is a different story.
What's the GDP last year of China? Again, there are lots of debates about how you count it, but order of magnitude, 18 trillion dollars. Way more important than Russia, but still not the size of the United States, although it's catching up. And most people believe at current rates of economic growth, China will surpass the United States by the end of this decade.
And this creates an interesting dynamic within BRICS itself. Other members are eager to increase their influence and reduce American economic power, but they're not necessarily excited about replacing American hegemony with Chinese hegemony. India, in particular, views itself as a rival to China for leadership in Asia and the global South. Their border disputes are just one manifestation of a deeper competition.
But the problem is that once you look closer, these countries are riven with all kinds of rivalries. India and China obviously have a big border dispute going on. They are vying as the champion of the global South.
This internal competition makes it harder for BRICS to present a unified front or agree on concrete economic initiatives. It's one thing to complain about the dollar's dominance. It's another to agree on what should replace it. Now for the big question, can BRICS countries actually break free from the dollar? There's plenty of motivation.
Last year, for the very first time, China bought a shipment of oil from Kuwait and paid for it in yuan instead of dollars. Never happened before. And we went back to the Kuwaitis and we raised all kinds of hell. And they're like, look, what are we going to do? They're a major global power. This is how they wanted to pay for it.
But talk of a unified BRICS currency faces major obstacles.
There's been a lot of talk about creating an alternative BRICS currency, but of course, a lot of the members of the BRICS themselves are loath to replace one currency, for instance, the US dollar, with another currency, for instance, the Chinese renminbi.
No one wants to trade dollar dependency for yuan dependency. So what are they doing instead? Creating parallel payment systems that bypass Western-controlled networks.
I was struck by how few places took MasterCard and Visa. Well, they took this card called Panda Card, and everybody had these Panda cards. So I asked one of the shopkeepers, what is this Panda Card? He said, with Visa and MasterCard, because they're American companies, all transactions are routed through New York. And so even if the transaction only hits New York for a tenth of a second, it's still considered to be a U.S. transaction. So if the U.S. government imposes sanctions, we can't make that transaction.
China has created its own cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, as an alternative to SWIFT. Russia developed SPFS. India uses a rupee-based payment system for trade with Iran and Russia. These aren't direct dollar replacements, but they're creating alternative pathways for international trade. One area where BRICS countries definitely agree: they're tired of Western sanctions. Russia, Iran, and even China are working on ways to make themselves sanctions-proof. It's like financial body armor.
Sanctions have hurt the Russian economy. They want to come up with, and they're borrowing some very clever experiments through cryptocurrencies. There's something called mBridge, and the Bank of International Settlements has been working on this, and China has been a big player in it as well. So this could ultimately dethrone the U.S.
The sanctions imposed on Russia after the Ukraine invasion were unprecedented in scale, freezing around $300 billion of Russian central bank assets held abroad. That sent shockwaves through the BRICS countries. If the West could do this to Russia, they could do it to anyone. As a result, we're seeing several trends. BRICS countries reducing their dollar reserves, increasing gold purchases by central banks, creating bilateral currency swap agreements, settling more trade in local currencies. None of these will replace the dollar overnight, but they're slowly chipping away at its dominance. And the more the U.S. uses sanctions as a foreign policy tool, the more motivation other countries have to find workarounds. So here's the million or trillion-dollar question. Is this the beginning of the end for American economic dominance? Some experts think we're witnessing a major historical shift.
The United States emerged as the dominant player in the world. I mean, look, we have 700 to 800 military bases around the world right now. No other country has anything remotely like that. That's a reflection of our empire. You can put whatever fancy words you want around it, but that's what this is. And it had no chance of surviving forever. It would eventually fade away like every other empire.
But transitions from one global order to another don't happen overnight. The British Empire didn't collapse in a day, and the dollar still has some powerful advantages: deep and liquid markets, rule of law, and network effects that are hard to replace. What we're likely to see isn't a sudden collapse of the dollar, but rather a gradual transition to a more multipolar economic system, where the dollar is still important, but no longer absolutely dominant. This shift will have real impacts on Americans. If foreign demand for dollars decreases, the U.S. may face higher interest rates, inflation, and limits on deficit spending that previous generations didn't have to worry about. Can BRICS countries challenge Western economic dominance? The answer isn't a simple yes or no. They're already doing it in some ways, but the challenge is far from complete.
History does not happen in a morality play. You're not going to have the bad disappear and replaced by the good. It's never worked that way. What you have to have is an analysis of what's actually going on. And the unanimity, the dominance of the United States is over. And the whole world is trying to figure out, every company in the world, every country, how do you navigate a new international order?
The global economic system is going through a period of transition. The dollar will remain important for years to come, but its unquestioned supremacy is fading. BRICS countries are creating alternatives and workarounds, gradually shifting the economic center of gravity eastward and southward. Whether you see this as a crisis or an opportunity depends on your perspective. But one thing is certain: the economic world our children will inhabit will look very different from the one we've known. And BRICS, despite its internal contradictions, is helping to shape that new reality.